It's rigged. Those were the words fans across social media were screaming after what unfolded during the Indiana Fever's explosive showdown against the Phoenix Mercury. But what nobody expected was that the frustration boiling over inside the arena may have finally pushed Indiana Fever head coach Stephanie White to her breaking point. Because what happened on that court didn't just leave players stunned. It left an entire fan base furious. And by the end of the night, questions were being asked that nobody thought would be asked this season. Was the game actually being called fairly? Or was something much bigger happening right in front of everyone's eyes? From the opening whistle, the tension felt different. Every possession seemed to come with controversy. Every foul call triggered outrage. Every replay created more confusion. And as the game spiraled deeper into chaos, the cameras repeatedly caught Fever players throwing their hands into the air, looking toward officials with expressions that seemed to say the exact same thing. What game are they watching? Then came the moment that changed everything. A sequence so bizarre, so controversial, and so unbelievable, that even longtime basketball fans couldn't believe what they were witnessing. The crowd erupted. Players exploded. Social media instantly caught fire. And according to multiple reports circulating online after the game, frustration inside the Fever organization reached levels nobody had seen before. But here's where the story gets even crazier. Instead of folding under the pressure, instead of letting the controversy destroy their focus, Caitlin Clark and the Fever responded in the most dangerous way possible. They started fighting back. Every bucket became a statement. Every possession became personal. And every minute that passed seemed to make the situation even more explosive. Meanwhile, Stephanie White appeared to be watching it all unfold in disbelief. The officiating, the technical fouls, the confrontations, the endless whistles. And by the time the final buzzer sounded, the basketball world wasn't talking about the score anymore. They were talking about a scandal, a controversy, and a series of decisions that have fans demanding answers. Because what happened during Fever versus Mercury may have been far bigger than a regular season basketball game. And the deeper people dig into what unfolded, the more shocking this story becomes. To understand why this game exploded into one of the most controversial moments of the season, you have to understand something important. This wasn't just another Indiana Fever game. This wasn't just another regular season matchup. And it definitely wasn't just another night of basketball. The tension surrounding this game had been building for months. Maybe even longer. Ever since Caitlin Clark arrived in the WNBA, every Fever game has carried an extra layer of attention. Every foul gets replayed. Every confrontation gets analyzed. Every whistle becomes a debate. And whether people like it or not, Clark has become the center of the biggest conversations in women's basketball. That's exactly why emotions were already running high before the Fever ever stepped onto the court against Phoenix. Because the Fever entered this game carrying pressure from every direction imaginable. Fans expected wins. Media expected dominance. Critics expected mistakes. And opponents seemed more motivated than ever to make life difficult for Indiana's biggest star. Meanwhile, head coach Stephanie White had spent the entire season trying to keep her team focused amid constant distractions. It hasn't been easy. One week it's injury concerns. The next week it's officiating controversies. Then it's media debates. Then it's social media arguments. Then it's another physical game that leaves fans demanding answers. The Fever have spent much of the season fighting battles on multiple fronts. And Stephanie White has been standing in the middle of all of it. Trying to keep the locker room together. Trying to keep emotions under control. Trying to make sure the team doesn't get distracted by everything happening outside the lines. But there comes a point where even the most patient coach reaches a limit. And many fans believe that limit may have finally been reached during this game. What makes the situation even more interesting is the history between Indiana and Phoenix. These teams don't exactly share a warm relationship. Over recent seasons, matchups between the two sides have developed a reputation for being physical. Very physical. Possessions are rarely easy. Players fight for every inch of space. And emotions have a tendency to boil over quickly. So when the schedule brought these teams together again, many people expected fireworks. What nobody expected was the level of chaos that would eventually unfold. The atmosphere inside the arena felt intense from the very beginning. Fans were loud. Players were emotional. And every possession seemed to carry a little more energy than usual. You could feel it. Something wasn't right. Something felt different. Then there was Caitlin Clark. As always, She entered the game carrying enormous expectations. That's become normal for her. Every arena she visits is packed. Every performance is dissected. Every mistake becomes national discussion. Few athletes in professional sports are under the microscope the way Clark is right now. And with that attention comes pressure. A lot of pressure. Opposing defenses focus on her. Opposing fans target her. Opposing players know that any interaction involving Clark is likely to become a headline. That creates a unique environment. One where every moment feels magnified. One where even the smallest confrontation can suddenly become a national story. Stephanie White understands this reality better than anyone. She sees it every day. She sees how much physical attention Clark receives. She sees how opponents try to frustrate her. She sees how quickly narratives form around every game. And throughout the season, White has repeatedly emphasized the importance of staying composed, remaining disciplined, ignoring distractions, playing through adversity. But that's easier said than done. Especially when emotions are running high. Especially when players feel they aren't getting fair treatment. And especially when controversial decisions begin stacking on top of one another. As the season progressed, frustration among portions of the Fever fanbase had already been growing. Many supporters believed Indiana wasn't getting consistent whistles. Others felt certain games were being officiated differently depending on the opponent. Whether those concerns were justified or not, the perception existed. And perception can become powerful. Every questionable call adds fuel. Every controversial decision creates another debate. Every heated moment becomes evidence for whichever side people already believe. By the time Indiana faced Phoenix, those frustrations were already simmering beneath the surface. All it would take was one spark. One controversial moment. One sequence that pushed emotions over the edge. Unfortunately, that spark arrived much sooner than anyone expected. As the game began, Indiana struggled offensively. Shots weren't falling. Possessions felt rushed. The rhythm simply wasn't there. Meanwhile, Phoenix appeared determined to make every possession difficult. The Fever looked frustrated. The crowd looked restless. And the pressure inside the building continued growing with every passing minute. Then came the whistles. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Just normal basketball. Normal officiating. Normal game flow. But gradually, reactions started changing. Players began questioning calls. Fans started voicing frustration. Coaches became visibly animated on the sidelines. The tension was no longer hidden. It was becoming impossible to ignore. And the deeper the game moved into chaos, the more people started paying attention to the officials instead of the basketball itself. That's never a good sign. Because when referees become the biggest story in a game, emotions usually aren't far behind. Stephanie White could feel it. Her players could feel it. The fans could feel it. Everyone inside the arena could sense that something was building. Something dangerous. Something explosive. What nobody knew at the time was that the biggest controversy of the night hadn't even happened yet. The arguments. The technical fouls. The confrontations. The outrage. The accusations. All of that was still waiting around the corner. And when it finally arrived, it would completely change the direction of the game, ignite social media, and leave the entire basketball world asking one question. Did the Indiana Fever just become the center of the biggest officiating controversy of the season? Because what happened next would leave players furious, fans stunned, and Stephanie White closer to a breaking point than anyone had ever seen before. If the first quarter created frustration, what happened next created absolute chaos. And this is where the story takes a dramatic turn. Because for nearly 12 minutes, the Indiana Fever looked completely lost. Nothing was working. Shots were missing. Passes were off target. The offense looked stuck in quicksand. Every possession felt harder than the one before. The crowd inside the arena couldn't believe what they were watching. This wasn't the explosive Fever offense they expected. This wasn't the team that had spent weeks building momentum. This looked like a team completely out of sync. By the end of the first quarter, Indiana had scored only 6 points. 6. The number was so shocking that fans immediately began posting it all over social media. Some thought it was a typo. Others thought scoreboards were malfunctioning. But it was real. The Fever had just produced one of their worst offensive quarters of the entire season. And that's when the frustration started boiling over. Players looked irritated. The coaching staff looked concerned. The crowd grew restless. But what happened next would make those offensive struggles seem insignificant. Because while Indiana was trying to figure out its offense, another battle was quietly developing. A battle that had nothing to do with scoring, and everything to do with emotions. Throughout the game, Caitlin Clark appeared to be receiving constant pressure from Phoenix defenders. Every cut felt physical. Every screen felt aggressive. Every possession seemed to involve contact. Again and again, Clark found herself exchanging words with Mercury players. Nothing major at first. Just competitive basketball. Or at least that's how it appeared. But beneath the surface, tensions were growing. And eventually, something had to give. Then it happened. One moment. One interaction. One sequence that changed the entire atmosphere inside the arena. As players ran down the floor during a possession, Clark and Dawanna Borner became tangled up. Their arms locked briefly. Words were exchanged. Both players turned toward each other. And suddenly everybody nearby started paying attention. The crowd reacted instantly. Players started moving toward the situation. Officials rushed in. And within seconds, what should have been a minor exchange became something much bigger. Technical fouls were assessed. The arena exploded with boos. Fans couldn't understand what they had just witnessed. From their perspective, two players had exchanged words. Nothing more. No punches. No shoving. No major physical altercation. Yet somehow technical fouls were flying almost immediately. The game suddenly felt different. The energy changed. The tension multiplied. And instead of calming the situation, many believed the officiating crew had made things worse. That's when the first twist arrived. Because rather than ending the confrontation, the technical fouls opened the floodgates. Players from both teams became increasingly emotional. Every whistle was questioned. Every call triggered reactions. Every possession carried a new layer of hostility. It felt less like a basketball game and more like a pressure cooker preparing to explode. Meanwhile, Stephanie White stood on the sideline watching everything unfold. The cameras repeatedly caught her reacting to calls, talking with officials, trying to understand what was happening, trying to keep her players focused, trying to prevent emotions from taking over. But the game was slipping further and further into chaos. Then came another controversial moment. One that immediately sent social media into meltdown. During a physical sequence involving Alyssa Thomas and Caitlin Clark, contact occurred near the lane. Fans inside the building thought they saw one thing. The officials apparently saw another. The whistle blew. The call went against Indiana. And the reaction was instant. The crowd erupted. Thousands of fans jumped to their feet. Players looked stunned. Even television commentators sounded confused. Replays began circulating online within seconds. Slow-motion angles spread everywhere. Fans debated every frame. Sports accounts started posting screenshots. And suddenly the game wasn't just being watched by those inside the arena. It was becoming a national conversation. The controversy spread rapidly. Messages flooded social media. Comments exploded. Hashtags started trending. People who weren't even watching the game suddenly wanted to know what happened. And through all of it, Stephanie White appeared increasingly frustrated. Every new whistle seemed to raise the temperature. Every disputed call added more pressure. Every controversial decision pushed emotions closer to the edge. But the biggest explosion was still coming. Because by the start of the fourth quarter, the atmosphere had become toxic. Every possession felt personal. Every interaction carried extra meaning. Every player looked emotionally invested. And then everything boiled over. Another confrontation erupted. More players got involved. Voices were raised. Officials rushed toward the scene. Fans screamed from the stands. For a brief moment, it felt like nobody knew what would happen next. Then came the technical fouls. Again. And again. And again. The whistles wouldn't stop. One technical became multiple technicals. Players from both teams were being penalized. The game ground to a halt. Nobody could establish rhythm. Nobody could regain momentum. Every few moments another discussion seemed to be taking place. Reviews. Conversations. Warnings. Technicals. The flow of basketball completely disappeared. Fans grew increasingly frustrated. Even neutral observers began questioning what they were watching. Instead of discussing great plays, everyone was discussing officiating. Instead of celebrating basketball, everyone was debating whistles. And that's when the first major twist completely flipped the story. Because despite all the controversy, despite all the frustration, despite all the distractions, Caitlin Clark suddenly took over the game. Out of nowhere, the player who had struggled early became unstoppable. Deep three-pointers started falling. Transition opportunities turned into highlights. Assists began piling up. The crowd came alive. Every basket increased the noise inside the arena. Every successful possession shifted momentum. And with each passing minute, the Mercury appeared increasingly frustrated. What had looked like a comfortable Phoenix advantage earlier in the night was disappearing. Fast. Very fast. Indiana wasn't just coming back. Indiana was taking control. The team that scored only 6 points in the first quarter suddenly looked like a completely different group. Ball movement improved. Energy increased. Confidence returned. And Phoenix had no answer. The more controversial the game became, the better Clark seemed to play. That only intensified the emotions. Fans viewed every basket as a response. Every assist as a statement. Every successful possession as proof that the Fever refused to be rattled. The building shook with energy. Momentum had completely shifted. And for the first time all night, Phoenix looked vulnerable. Very vulnerable. But just when it seemed like the drama had reached its peak, another shocking development emerged. One that nobody saw coming. Because reports began spreading online that frustration inside the Fever organization had reached a boiling point. Fans noticed reactions on the bench. Analysts started discussing body language. Commentators questioned certain decisions. And suddenly attention turned toward Stephanie White. Not because of the score. Not because of strategy. But because of what appeared to be growing outrage over the way the game was being managed. People began asking questions. Was White reaching her limit? Had the constant controversies finally become too much? Was this simply frustration in the heat of competition? Or was something bigger happening behind the scenes? Nobody knew. But one thing was certain. The game had transformed into far more than a basketball contest. It had become a controversy. A spectacle. A story that was rapidly spreading across the sports world. And as the final minutes approached, one massive question remained unanswered. If this was only the beginning of the drama, what would happen when the entire basketball world woke up and started dissecting every second of what had just unfolded? If fans thought the chaos would calm down after the fourth quarter confrontations, they were completely wrong. Because that's when the story exploded beyond the arena. What had started as a heated basketball game was suddenly becoming one of the biggest talking points in the sports world. And the reason wasn't the final score. It wasn't Caitlin Clark's stat line. It wasn't Indiana's comeback. It was the officiating. Within minutes of the final buzzer, social media erupted. Clips from the game were spreading everywhere. Every controversial whistle was being replayed. Every confrontation was being analyzed frame by frame. Every reaction from players and coaches was being scrutinized. The internet had officially gone into investigation mode. And the deeper fans looked, the angrier they became. One clip in particular started generating enormous attention. The sequence involving Clark and the officials. The technical fouls. The stoppages. The endless whistles. The footage quickly accumulated thousands of comments. Then tens of thousands. Then hundreds of thousands. The discussion was no longer limited to Fever fans. Basketball fans from across the country jumped into the debate. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. And almost nobody could agree on what they had just watched. Some argued the officials were simply trying to maintain control. Others claimed the game had been over-officiated from the start. Some blamed the players. Others blamed the referees. But regardless of which side people chose, one thing was undeniable. The controversy had become bigger than the game itself. Then came the second twist. Because as fans continued breaking down footage, several sports commentators began highlighting a strange pattern. Again and again, conversations kept returning to the same question. Why did so many routine interactions suddenly result in technical fouls? Why did minor verbal exchanges escalate so quickly? Why did the flow of the game disappear completely during the final quarter? The questions multiplied. The speculation intensified. And suddenly a narrative started spreading online. A narrative that would pour gasoline onto an already raging fire. Fans began suggesting that the officials had completely lost control of the game. Not just made mistakes. Lost control. That distinction mattered. Because a missed call can happen in any game. A controversial whistle can happen in any game. But losing control changes everything. It creates uncertainty. It creates frustration. And most importantly, it creates distrust. That distrust was now spreading everywhere. Meanwhile, video clips showing Stephanie White's reactions started going viral. Every frustrated expression. Every conversation with officials. Every visible sign of irritation. Fans were dissecting all of it. Some claimed she looked furious. Others believed she was simply protecting her players. But regardless of interpretation, her reactions became a major talking point. Then something even more surprising happened. Several prominent sports pages began posting side-by-side comparisons of controversial moments from earlier games throughout the season. The comparisons immediately sparked new debates. Fans began connecting incidents, discussing previous officiating controversies, referencing earlier games involving physical play. The conversation was growing larger by the hour. And suddenly the Fever versus Mercury game was no longer an isolated event. It had become part of a much bigger discussion. A discussion about consistency. A discussion about officiating standards. A discussion about how star players are treated. The debate spread rapidly. Comment sections became battlegrounds. Supporters and critics argued non-stop. Every new replay created fresh controversy. Every new opinion generated hundreds of responses. The basketball world was divided. Then came what many fans considered the biggest reveal of the entire night. Not because it was officially confirmed, but because it changed how many people viewed the game. Several analysts pointed out something fascinating. Despite all the controversy, despite all the distractions, despite all the emotional confrontations, the Fever actually played some of their best basketball once the chaos started. Think about that. The more emotional the game became, the better Indiana performed. The more whistles interrupted the action, the stronger their response became. The more adversity they faced, the more dangerous they looked. That realization completely shifted the narrative. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't only about controversial calls. It was about resilience. It was about how Indiana responded. It was about how Caitlin Clark responded. Because while everyone else was focused on the chaos, Clark was focused on winning. And that's where the story becomes even more dramatic. The player at the center of the controversy refused to let the controversy define the outcome. Instead of arguing endlessly, instead of allowing frustration to take over, she continued attacking, continued creating opportunities, continued making plays. The Mercury had spent much of the night trying to disrupt Indiana's rhythm. But by the final stretch, Indiana appeared stronger than ever. That realization frustrated Phoenix supporters. It energized Fever fans. And it created an entirely new storyline. Maybe the controversy hadn't hurt Indiana. Maybe it had motivated them. Maybe every whistle had simply added fuel to the fire. Social media exploded once again. Fans started sharing messages celebrating the team's toughness. Others praised players for staying composed. Some even suggested the adversity had united the Fever locker room. Whether that was true or not hardly mattered. The perception had already taken hold. And perception drives headlines. Then came another surprising development. Attention shifted toward the future. Because as emotional as this game had been, many fans suddenly realized something important. This rivalry wasn't over. Not even close. The Mercury and Fever would see each other again. That realization changed everything. The arguments weren't ending. The emotions weren't disappearing. The tension wasn't fading away. If anything, it was growing. Players would remember what happened. Fans would remember what happened. Coaches would remember what happened. And the next matchup suddenly became one of the most anticipated games on the schedule. People wanted answers. People wanted revenge. People wanted another chapter. But perhaps the most shocking part of all was this. The controversy had completely overshadowed what should have been the biggest story of the night. An impressive Indiana victory. A major comeback. A statement performance. Those achievements were almost forgotten amid the chaos. And that fact alone revealed just how explosive the situation had become. Because when a victory isn't the headline, when the basketball isn't the headline, when the conversation is dominated by controversy instead of competition, you know something extraordinary has happened. And according to many fans, the story was only beginning. Because behind the debates, behind the outrage, and behind the viral clips, one enormous question continued hanging over the entire situation. What if the real fallout from this game hadn't happened yet? What if the biggest consequences were still coming? And if that's true, the next chapter could be even more explosive than the first. By the time the final buzzer sounded, the game itself was no longer the biggest story. The score? Almost forgotten. The standings? Nobody cared. Every conversation across the basketball world had shifted toward one thing and one thing only. What exactly happened with the officiating? Within minutes, social media erupted into complete chaos. Fans flooded every platform imaginable. Clips of the controversial calls spread at lightning speed. Slow-motion replays. Freeze frames. Different camera angles. Zoomed-in screenshots. The internet was dissecting every second of the game like investigators examining evidence in a major case. And the reactions were absolutely explosive. One viral post read, "I've watched basketball for 25 years and I've never seen anything like this." Another wrote, "If this isn't the worst officiated game of the season, I don't know what is." A third post exploded past 2 million views after simply stating, "The refs became the main characters tonight." That single sentence seemed to summarize exactly how fans felt. The game had stopped being about players. It had become about whistles. And people were furious. But then things got even more dramatic. A former league analyst appeared on a late-night sports show and delivered a statement that instantly went viral. According to the analyst, the officials completely lost control of that game. Those 6 words ignited another firestorm. Because suddenly it wasn't just fans complaining. Now respected voices around the sport were openly questioning what happened. And that changed everything. Meanwhile, Fever supporters were rallying around Caitlin Clark. Thousands of fans began posting clips showing moments where Clark appeared frustrated by calls. The hashtag supporting her started climbing rapidly. Comment sections became battlegrounds. One side argued the Fever had been treated unfairly. The other side insisted officials were simply enforcing the rules. The arguments became so heated that some threads accumulated thousands of replies within hours. Nobody was backing down. Nobody was changing their minds. The divide was growing larger by the minute. Then came Sophie Cunningham. And that's when things really exploded. Fans couldn't stop talking about her role in the chaos. Some praised her for standing up for her teammates. Others accused her of escalating tensions. But regardless of where people stood, everyone agreed on one thing. Sophie had become one of the biggest talking points of the entire night. One viral comment captured the mood perfectly. "Love her or hate her, she's not letting anyone push the Fever around." That post alone generated tens of thousands of reactions. The debate was officially out of control. Then the media joined the frenzy. Sports shows began dedicating entire segments to the controversy. Panels of analysts argued back and forth. One host claimed the officiating had overshadowed a fantastic comeback performance. Another insisted the players were responsible for letting emotions boil over. A third analyst offered a different perspective entirely. According to them, the game exposed a much bigger issue that had been building throughout the season. And that theory immediately gained traction. Because the more people talked about it, the more questions started appearing. Why had tensions escalated so quickly? Why were technical fouls being handed out at such an unusual pace? Why did multiple players look stunned after certain whistles? Nobody seemed able to agree on the answers. But everyone wanted them. Then came the most shocking reaction of all. A prominent former coach posted a cryptic message online. Just 4 words. "Something feels very wrong." That was it. No explanation. No context. No clarification. Just 4 words. And somehow those 4 words generated more speculation than entire television segments. Fans immediately began creating theories. What did the coach mean? Were they talking about the officiating? The league? The game management? Something else entirely? The mystery only fueled the fire. And the timing couldn't have been worse for league officials. Because now even neutral observers were paying attention. People who hadn't watched the game were suddenly watching clips. People who didn't support either team were suddenly debating controversial calls. The story had escaped basketball circles. It was becoming mainstream sports news. Meanwhile, reporters continued asking Stephanie White questions. And every answer seemed to create even more headlines. Her visible frustration became one of the defining images of the night. Photos of her reactions circulated everywhere. Television broadcasts replayed them repeatedly. Sports blogs analyzed every expression, every gesture, every comment. The narrative was snowballing, and nobody could stop it. Then another unexpected twist emerged. Several current players from around the league began quietly reacting. Not with direct statements. Not with interviews. Just subtle social media activity. Likes. Shares. Cryptic emojis. Short comments. Tiny actions that fans immediately noticed. And once people noticed, speculation went into overdrive. Were other players secretly agreeing with the criticism? Were they sending a message? Or were fans reading too much into it? Again, nobody knew. But uncertainty only made the story bigger. By the following morning, debate shows were still discussing the game. Podcasts were breaking down every controversial sequence. Online creators were producing hour-long analysis videos. Reaction channels were exploding with views. The story simply refused to die. And that's when a new question started dominating conversations. A question that nobody had considered during the game itself. What happens in the rematch? Because suddenly the next Fever Mercury matchup wasn't just another game on the schedule. It had become must-watch television. Fans were already circling the date. Comment sections were counting down the days. People wanted answers. People wanted revenge. People wanted closure. But most importantly, people wanted to see whether the tension would explode all over again. Would Clark respond? Would Cunningham back down? Would the Mercury arrive looking for payback? Would the officiating crew face even greater scrutiny? Nobody knew. And that uncertainty transformed the upcoming game into one of the most anticipated matchups of the season. The controversy wasn't fading. It was growing. Every hour brought new debates, new theories, new accusations, new questions. And as the basketball world continued arguing over what really happened, one thing became impossible to ignore. The story was no longer about a single game. It had become a league-wide conversation. A conversation that was only getting louder. And just when everyone thought they'd heard every possible angle, a shocking new development was about to emerge that would completely change the narrative yet again. Just when it seemed like the controversy couldn't possibly get any bigger, everything changed. Because late that night, after the headlines, after the debates, after millions of fans had already spent hours arguing online, a new piece of information started making the rounds. At first, hardly anyone noticed it. It wasn't a major news report. It wasn't an official statement. It wasn't even a television interview. It was a short clip. A very short clip. But what appeared in that clip immediately sent fans into detective mode. The footage showed several Fever players walking toward the locker room after the game. Nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic. At least not initially. Then fans noticed something. One player appeared to be speaking passionately while gesturing toward the court. Another player nodded. A third player shook her head. Nobody could hear what was being said. The audio was completely drowned out by arena noise. Yet that didn't stop the internet from trying to figure it out. Within hours, thousands of comments appeared. People were slowing the footage down, reading lips, creating theories. And the speculation exploded. Some believed players were discussing the officiating. Others thought they were talking about the Mercury. A few insisted they were discussing something much larger. Nobody knew for certain. But one thing was clear. The controversy was far from over. Then another unexpected moment happened. During a post-game media session, Stephanie White was asked one final question. The room had already spent several minutes discussing the game. Most people expected a routine answer. Instead, White paused. She looked down. Then she smiled. Not a happy smile. Not a relieved smile. The kind of smile that makes reporters immediately pay attention. And then she said something that instantly ignited another wave of reactions. She suggested that everyone should watch what happens next. That was it. No explanation. No details. No follow-up. Just a cryptic statement hanging in the air. The room went silent. Reporters immediately started exchanging looks. What did she mean? Was she talking about the next game? The officiating? League reviews? Something else entirely? Nobody got an answer. And that mystery became the newest headline. By midnight, sports blogs were publishing articles about those 4 words. Fans were analyzing them. Commentators were debating them. Theories multiplied by the minute. But then something even stranger happened. Several Fever players began posting messages online. Not direct responses. Not official statements. Just short posts. A few emojis. A few cryptic captions. Nothing that explicitly addressed the controversy. Yet fans immediately connected the dots. And once that happened, speculation reached an entirely different level. Some supporters believed the team was sending a message. Others argued people were reading too much into harmless posts. But regardless of which side people chose, everyone was paying attention. The spotlight wasn't fading. It was getting brighter. Meanwhile, the Mercury found themselves dealing with a completely different problem. Because while the conversation initially focused on officiating, more and more people were beginning to revisit the game's physical moments. The confrontations. The technical fouls. The arguments. The tension. Suddenly, every interaction between players was being replayed repeatedly. Every gesture was scrutinized. Every reaction became evidence for one side or the other. The basketball world had effectively turned into a courtroom. And everyone believed they had the truth. Then came the biggest surprise. The rematch. Not the game itself. The anticipation. Ticket interest reportedly surged. Online discussions exploded. Fans who normally wouldn't care about a regular season matchup suddenly wanted front row seats to the drama. Because this wasn't just basketball anymore. This had become personal. At least that's how many fans viewed it. People wanted to know what would happen when these teams saw each other again. Would tensions carry over? Would emotions boil over again? Would officials crack down even harder? Or would the players settle everything on the court? Nobody had the answer. And that's exactly why interest kept growing. But here's where things become truly fascinating. The Fever's victory should have been the story. A remarkable comeback. A dominant response after a terrible start. A performance led by one of the league's biggest stars. Yet almost nobody was talking about that anymore. Instead, the controversy had swallowed everything. The arguments. The reactions. The questions. The mystery. It all became bigger than the final score. And that realization left many fans wondering something important. Was this game simply a strange one-night incident? Or was it a sign of something much bigger happening around the Fever? Because if similar situations continued appearing, if tensions continued rising, if controversies continued following this team, then this story might only be in its earliest chapter. And that's the possibility that has everyone paying attention. Not what happened. What happens next? Because every major sports controversy reaches a turning point. A moment where emotions either cool down or explode completely. The Fever and Mercury appear to be racing toward that exact moment. The rematch is approaching. The pressure is building. The spotlight is growing. And every player involved knows millions of eyes will be watching, waiting, analyzing, judging, searching for the next headline, the next confrontation, the next viral moment, the next piece of drama. And if this game proved anything, it's that nobody can confidently predict what happens when these two teams share the floor again. Maybe everything settles down. Maybe cooler heads prevail. Maybe basketball becomes the focus again. Or maybe the next chapter becomes even more explosive than the first. Because behind closed doors, emotions are still running high. Questions remain unanswered. Fans remain divided. And the controversy refuses to disappear. Which means one thing is certain. This story is not over. In fact, according to whispers circulating around the basketball world, the most surprising development of all may still be waiting just around the corner. And if those rumors turn out to be true, everything fans think they know about this controversy could change overnight. What do you think really happened in this game? Was Stephanie White justified in being furious about the officiating? Did the referees completely lose control of the game? Or are fans overreacting to what was simply an emotional and physical matchup between two competitive teams? And what about Caitlin Clark? After everything that happened, the technical fouls, the confrontations, the controversial calls, and the non-stop pressure, she still managed to help lead Indiana to a huge victory. Was this one of her most impressive performances of the season? And let's talk about Sophie Cunningham. Did she do exactly what a teammate is supposed to do by stepping in and standing her ground? Or did her involvement make an already chaotic situation even bigger? We want to hear your opinion. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now and let us know where you stand, because this debate is dividing basketball fans everywhere. Are you Team Fever? Team Mercury? Or do you think the real story is the officiating controversy that overshadowed everything else? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button because it helps the channel more than you know. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss any of the latest updates, breaking stories, controversies, and biggest moments surrounding Caitlin Clark, the Indiana Fever, and the entire WNBA. And don't go anywhere yet. The rematch between the Fever and Mercury is right around the corner, and after everything we've seen, there is absolutely no guarantee that this rivalry is finished. In fact, many fans believe the next meeting could be even more intense, more emotional, and more controversial than what we just witnessed. So stay tuned, stay locked in, and keep your eyes on this story. Because if this game was only Chapter 1, the next chapter could completely change everything. Eyes fire!